past have gotten in the way of our understanding them. The image of the coolie, of the laundry person, the railway worker. As recently as the Second World War, all of the Chinese community in Los Angeles were simply moved about 10 blocks over to make room for Union Station. No one was asked whether they wanted to or not. Most of the Chinese wisdom was presented in cute little pithy sayings like fortune cookies, or like this little Peter Palper Press book, The Book of Tao, Key to the Mastery of Life. And the first chapter we're taking tonight appears on page 51 under the title, To Lead, Appear to Follow. So if you want to lead, well, just make it appear that you follow. It's somewhat clever, and it gives the sense that somehow the Chinese must be clever, or inscrutable, or cute, or negligible. All of those go in the same breath, and they have. And the translation runs something like this. Why do rivers and seas have dominion over lowlands? Because the one lowers itself to the other. To be elevated by the people, speak like they're inferior. In other words, if you have a nice university education, talk like a truck driver and you'll get by. To lead the people, walk behind them, which usually leads to pushing. Thus the truly wise are above, but people do not feel their weight, which is a little risque if you think about it. They walk in front, but people do not feel blocked. The whole world respects and never grows tired of such leadership. Because the truly wise are not aggressive, no one is aggressive toward them. All right? There's nothing to make of that. I mean, you can hear it and you can take it or leave it. There's nothing there. It's cute to read once, and you might own such a book too, because it's nice to have around, and you might glance at it some rainy afternoon for a little while, and that's it. That is not what the Tao Te Ching is. The Tao Te Ching, using a Greek word for that, is a thesis. It's an angle of vision to the center of the real. And by sighting the focus of one's seeing along a certain line of direction, a recursive line of inner direction is established. Why do we need an exterior line in order to develop the interior line? Is not the interior quite different? Yes, that's quite so. But most naive or native or natural, 3 N's, naive, native, natural, approaches to the interior results in dreams. Daydreams or nighttime dreams. You've all had experience with the vicissitudes of dream interpretation. There is no way, by growing up in this time space, that you can comport to the interior world at all. It is completely different. So that we use the term dream world. Aborigines in Australia use the term dream time. American Indians say to regain one's health, one needs to have a dream. But if your approach to the interior is a recursive function of a geometry established initially in this world, the thesis developed in such a activity. is the basis upon which a transformation can be made. For geometry is the series ordering of the study of the relationship of angles and directions, lines, points on planes. And the whole sense of geometry is to establish all of the universal relationships that develop along a line of vision, a sighting of an angle, the dividing of an angle according to another line, and so on. And so geometry has an approach to the interior that has a beginning introductory function. We can go in geometrically, but we cannot remain on the plane interiorly. So it requires a transformation from geometry to trigonometry, from the plane to the sphere, so that when we go in, our thesis, which establishes a whole plane of understanding, a horizon of learning, that thesis which establishes an initial horizon of learning can have a transformation into a sphere which then begins to really characterize the interior realm. And the way in which that sphere is established, is recognized, is discovered, is found out, is initially to rotate the plane. And one can rotate the plane around an axis. And if you have an axis, regardless of how large, how amplified the horizon is, you can rotate the entire plane on a single axis. Even though you have not defined the full extent of the plane, you can still rotate the plane and establish a likewise undefined spirituality within. So that the thesis, the beginning line, is that axis upon which an interior rotation can be made. And when we have that kind of dimension, that interior dimension where there's a trigonometry of the psyche, then we come to something like the Tao Te Ching. Because Lao Tzu is not talking about lines of reference on planes. He is talking about functional resonances in spheres of awareness. And so Lao Tzu is extremely important to us when we see that he helps us to establish an initial thesis into nature, which has a recursive function into our inner nature. And in each of the chapters of the Tao Te Ching, he shows us again how we can rotate on the axis of nature and inner spirit. Nature and spirit. On that axis, we can establish a sphere of interiority, which is also at the same time established in nature. For when we rotate that horizon of understanding on the axis of our initial insight, we not only establish an inner trigonometry, but at the same time a seamless sphere that includes inner and outer. So that what started as an outer world and an inner world, and we kept the fiction of the outer world and the inner world through the whole level of geometry, once we put it into motion and generated the trigonometric function, then the distinction between inner and outer no longer functions for us adequately, is no longer a discriminating, useful separation, So that Lao Tzu does not talk about the inner world or the outer world, but he talks about heaven, earth, Tiansha. Now the original meaning of Tiansha in Chinese is literally all under heaven. Everything under heaven together. I translate it as heaven hyphen earth. And that's a hyphen, not the word hyphen. Heaven, earth, Tiansha. D.T. Suzuki loved to translate it as the worlds. And that's somewhat misleading to us, because it isn't the worlds. One of the whole reasons for developing a thesis in the first time is that what we would consider the world is actually chaotic. Its order is only held together by a forceful imposition. An imposition by one's mind, an imposition by one's ritual, an imposition by social mores, by sociological traditions, by psychological inclinations. The list is very long. If we were able to remove each of those impositions, we would increasingly experience the world as chaotic. And in fact, many people who have a sudden realization, hopefully not through some kind of chemical induction of drugs, but if you have a sudden intuition, a moment of deja vu, a moment of high clarity, the world can be seen to be very chaotic. It does not hold together at all. It does not make sense at all. This world is really nonsense. And it is only because of our confidence, or our need to believe, which is more accurate, in the impositions that we give to it, that it seems at all ordered. But the mystics, the madmen, the babies, the animals who do not live with the impositions do rather well. And so one asks, what world then do they live in? And here, the psychological insight is that the language that we're beginning to use betrays us. Because it's not so much what kind of a world do they live in, but that they participate with a oneness in which concept of world is no longer extant. The whole idea of a world that should make sense does not occur to animals, babies, mystics, poets, lovers. They really just don't care. They don't need to. Lao Tzu belongs in that world, and he writes from the stance of no particular plane. And so his language has none of the preconceptions, none of the delicately honed prepositional, adjectival, artificial pronominal jargon, which all impositions on the world require. And so the language of the Tao Te Ching is very difficult to translate. An American poet, Richard Weir, tried his hand at the Tao Te Ching in the northern mountains of New Mexico at the time that D.H. Lawrence was living up there. Here's how he translates chapter 66, which we started off with this rather cute little tea time booklet. Here's Weiner's translation. Why are rivers and seas lords of the waters? Because they afford the common level, and so become lords of the waters. The common people love a sound man, because he does not talk above their level. Because though he lead them, he follows them. He imposes no weight on them, and they, in turn, because he does not impede them, yield to him contempt. People never tire of anyone who is not bent upon comparison. Now it sounds a lot better than the previous one, but I must say there's no advance whatsoever. If you set on this with a high discriminative consciousness, it falls apart. If you seek to fly poetically, it doesn't operate. So there's neither freedom nor exactness here. And eventually, it has to be put alongside the growing stack of rejected translations. Not rejected because they're bad, but rejected on the grounds that they are not Lao Tzu. And we're interested in reading someone who is not a coolie, who is not a laundry person, who is not a railway worker, who is not all of these stereotype images, but someone who is universally formidable and can teach in such a way as to include us, even though we live 25 centuries later on the other side of the world. A different translation, the third now. It's the Little Mentor paperback. It's the first translation I ever saw of the Tao Te Ching. Where I was growing up, this was the only version of the Tao Te Ching that was reachable anywhere around. And it was first published in 1955, and I think about that time I ran across it, and I think it was before I even had my first copy. I found out later that the translator, R.B. Blakeney, had done a translation of Meister Eckhart, a German mystic. And so his translation has a lot of German mystic tone to it. Let's see how he does. Same chapter, 66. He has a translation, then he has a little paraphrase at the bottom. The paraphrase in this case is only one sentence of about 2.5 lines. How could the rivers and the seas become like kings to valleys? Because of skill in lowliness, they have become the valley's lords. So then, to be above the folk, you speak as if you were beneath. And if you wish to be out front, then act as if you were behind. The wise man, so, is up above, but he is no burden to the folk. His station is ahead of them, to see they do not come to harm. The world will gladly help along. The wise man and will bear no grudge, since he contends not for his own, the world will not contend with him. And it's a little bit like Lewis Carroll. And you get into the rhythm and you think, well, he's at least flowing along, and then it's like one of those complicated string figures, and you finally pull it and you see that you didn't make any shape at all. There's no shape of learning. These are like inferior beings trying to grab the air and say, look at that air. And all you see are the shapes of the clumsy grabbing, because you cannot show air that way. It's easy to show air, but you have to use no hands. Let's try in my translation. Let's see what happens. And the whole reason for doing this is that there just simply, finally, is a huge stack of translations that are not Lao Tzu, and nothing there that is Lao Tzu. Not even one, if you can imagine. The Chinese characters, the two Chinese characters that entitle this chapter, I translate as behind you. Behind you. Now, what is behind you? Usually you think of the back of the head, or if you're standing, the back of the person. If it's the back of the head, it's the It's the way that it's the one area your eyes cannot see. If it's the back of your person, it's the one place you're not going. So that Lao Tzu is talking about what you do not see, where you do not go. And yet what you're seeing has a direct complementary relationship to what you do not see. And where you are going has a direct complementary relationship to where you're not going. And if your awareness is expanded to include the what you do not see with what you do see will occur in a spherical fashion. And if you include consciously where you're not going with where you are going, the sphere of comprehension is quite phenomenal. Behind you, rivers, waters, they thereby can be 100 valleys kings, that thereby they do lower themselves, therefore can be 100 valleys kings, thus thereby spirit gem, visioning above the people, surely thereby his language keeps under their sounds, visioning, nourishing the people, surely thereby personally behind their sounds, then thereby spirit gem dwells above, yet the people not burdened, dwells as leader, yet the people not injured. Thus thereby heaven earth rejoices, exalted, yet not exhausted. Thereby itself not quarrel, and therefore heaven earth none can with anyone quarrel. Now that's what Lao Tzu says. That's what the Chinese says. And I put the Chinese into English so that you can get the flow of how Lao Tzu talks. Now if you sit with this, like you sit with the rest of these, eventually there's like a vibration that will be set up, that the language will transform you. Whatever plane you're living on, whatever horizon, however expansive or however limited, whatever thesis you choose to use, whatever kind of insight you choose to favor, this will transform, will accept you and yours and transform it into the recognizable community of the mystical alert, which is the same the world over for all time. Following chapter 66, following behind you, but not in a causal way. 67 is not caused by 66. 66 is here, 67 is here, 68 is here, 69 is here. An ordinal presentation rather than a cardinal representation. We're not going to a higher level by going to 67. We're not making an advance over 66 by going to 67. There is no sense in Lao Tzu at all of any progress in a progression, any accumulation in a progression, any linear, so that you don't rush to read the Tao Te Ching. God, we're only on chapter 66, and we started with 37. We only got 30 chapters through, and we've got 50 chapters more to go. All that kind of computation is nonsensical. And as long as one would believe that there would be any kind of rationality in that approach, Lao Tzu is nonsensical, inscrutable. I've heard perfectly good academics who know the Chinese language, who teach the Chinese language, who are university professors for a long time, say, well, it's not really translatable. Well, it really is translatable. for one can speak that language. But before you can speak that language, you have to inhabit the sphere. You have to be there yourself. You have to talk. And if you are resonant with Lao Tzu, you can talk English in that way. Here it is. Chapter 67. Another ordinal chapter in this matrix of openness. The sphere of learning. When I was younger, I used to call it a field of inquiry. Field of inquiry. And that in order to have a field of inquiry, you have to generate it. And so you have to do different activities. You have to bring into motion different concerns. And instead of just reading a book to learn one at a time, you might have to have 5,000 or 6,000 books open over a period of several years and keep it all in process. Not finish any book. And once a field of inquiry of that size is generated, the only way that integration can happen is to wake up the deep self. To waken the sleeper. Because it's the only person who can deal with that. Because not only do we impose upon this world, we impose upon the inner world too. We put the impositions upon it. It's called clipping the wings of the little baby angels so they do not fly away, so you can keep track of them. It's a terrible thing. William Blake has a beautiful illustration of a supposedly wise old person with the big and black glasses and the big shears trimming the wings so they cannot fly. Don't do that to your children. Don't do that to yourself. Plotinus says that it takes a long time after you are shorn by the world of your soul's wings to grow them back again. But you can. They're not lost forever. But if you have to grow them back again, then you have to practice patience. Then you have to develop stamina. Then you have to have the tenacity not to give up. And you have to find the right resonant population within to do that. Chapter 67 is entitled Three Treasures. And the translation that I offer to you reads like this. Tianshan, heaven, earth, all call me great, resemble not semblance. The Chinese characters make this beautiful book to show you that it's empty. There's no bait on it. Heaven, earth, all call me great, resemble not semblance. What do I resemble? I don't resemble semblance. Well, what do you have if you don't resemble semblance? You are there. There's no semblance there. There is you. And since you don't resemble some semblance, whoever is there, the I who am here, must be approached in some way consonant with how I am. And so you have to be there. You can't send a resemblance of yourself. And this sending a resemblance of oneself to appear on one's behalf, this is an old legal trick. Instead of appearing yourself, you send a lawyer. There are many words in the Greek, in Hebrew, in the Sanskrit, in the Chinese language for that kind of operation. Lao Tzu is very well acquainted with that sort of thing. Heaven, earth, all call me great, resemble not semblance. Not just that I don't resemble semblance, but I'm the great, not resemble semblance. Now, Only great because resemble not semblance. In other words, he takes this resembling, which is image making. He's saying if you're going to make an image of me, you will find that if you do it accurately, you have an image that doesn't register anything. If you're really good at this kind of mystical meditation, you can do it. It even has names. The world's treasury is chock full of techniques. It's called in Greek, eidetic. It means making a phenomenological frame to see only the image that is there. A great mathematical engineer who became a great Western philosopher, Edmund Husserl, developed a whole movement called phenomenology around the eidetic reduction. There is such a thing as getting a very exact frame within which to see one image at a time and to have the startling result that sometimes there is no image in the frame. And you can go back and you can check your frame-making capacity, and yes, usually there are images in the frame, but there is also experimentally verifiable, provably redoable, teachable technique achievable making a frame with no image. Now, sitting in his Paris cafes, Jean-Paul Sartre, trying the method, was absolutely disgusted by the fact that the world had lied to him, that there was no God, there was no soul, because when he got the technique down of the eidetic reduction of Edmund Husserl, he found that for him it was completely empty. And right in the middle of his great philosophical work, Being and Nothingness, is a little chapter called The Whole, where he says at the center of us there is a nothing. What kind of soul is that? And Lao Tzu would have said, Jean-Paul, have another glass of wine. Let's talk about this. It's very interesting, huh? But instead, Sartre got very panicked about this sort of thing as Westerners will. My God, if there's nothing there, then who am I? It must be absurd. And of course, what's absurd is to keep pushing the idea that there should be something there. Black Elk said, white men get lost in the blackness of their eyes, the pupil. That's where they get lost. Heaven, earth, all call me great resemble not semblance. Now only great because resemble not semblance. If semblance, boring indeed, it's mediocrity. Now I have three treasures. The one is recognized as compassion. Another one is recognized as economy. Another one is recognized as not daring, busy heaven-earth's summit. In other words, don't try to get to the top all the time. I mean, that's where the elbows are fiercest, at the top. The lower slopes are empty. I mean, it's trying to get to the top where everybody is in the middle. And for those who have walked away from the situation, why, there's a lot of room. It's even damn comfortable. Now I have three treasures. Remember and treasure their selves. This is a little odd usage of language. Remember and treasure their selves. That the treasures have selves. They have their own selves. Try and remember and treasure their selves. Now notice in Taoism there's always this sense that any quality that has existential vitality has the effect of a being, of a spirit, of an entity. When one takes a certain herb and makes an infusion of it, and the herb that helps clear your head, it's the spirit in the plant that did this for you. So there are many cells, and all their cells, but especially these cells, can be treasured. 3. Economy, compassion, not daring, heaven, earth's summit all the time. I heard an expression today. When I was in university, the economic water line was to make $10,000 a year before you were 30, and now I heard that it's $1 million a year before you're 30. Lao-Tzu says, compassion therefore can encourage. Economy therefore can be generous. Not dares busy heaven earth summit, therefore can hone home harvest. Now the Chinese, in chapter 67 here, is very interesting because it has an alliteration that quite frequently Lao-Tzu uses in Chinese pronunciation, an alliteration, so that you can get this. His alliteration here is Chang Chi Chang. And it's not that the first Chang is the same as the second Chang at all. They're different. But it's Chang Chi Chang. And the alliteration, D.T. Suzuki translates it, perfected as vessels of profit. But that's not really it. Let's see what Lightning does with chapter 67. Everywhere they say, the way, our doctrine. Is it a doctrine? Well, I don't think so. Or as Paul Newman would say, geez, I don't think so. Everywhere they say, the way, our doctrine, is so very like detested folly, but greatness of its own alone explains. Could you follow that? I read it, and that's very difficult. You see, it's like clever pretzel language that sounds fantastic, but the more you set with it, the more it settles out of the picture. And finally, you're glad you don't have to think about it. And it gets like really pleasurable to say, well, I don't have to read that again. And you see millions, well, perhaps tens of millions of high school students who throw their books down with relief. God, we don't have to read Shakespeare. Can you imagine? The mystical way is to lead a life such that that life killeth death, not that it killeth the spirit. Here is the translation of that little phrase, that little alliterative phrase. This is the death indeed of all our hope. Well, that's not it at all. That's not it at all. Byner's translation. Well, it's hard to even find it. I mean, here's his translation of the whole thing. We have to read the whole thing because it doesn't go with Lao-Tzu at all. It's like a jazz improvisation that went way off, and there's a little bit of the melody, but you have to be a good jazz musician to pick out the melody. Here's the improvisation. Nice tenor sax. Name that tune. Everyone says that my way of life is the way of a simpleton. I do up my language here. Being largely the way of a simpleton is what makes it worthwhile. How cute. If it were not the way of a simpleton, it would long ago have been worthless. Now you know the Chinese are inscrutable. They talk that way. These possessions of a simpleton being three, I choose and cherish, to care, to be fair, to be humble. Roll. To care, to be fair, to be humble. Now if you care and use fair and use humble, then you can come in. It's a kind of like a quippy, jerky jargon that might be a nice password for a supper club, but it's not nonsense at all. Let's finish it. When a man cares, he is unafraid. When he is fair, he leaves enough for others. When he is humble, he can grow. Whereas if, like men of today, he be bold without caring, you have to have Bill Cosby to really read this. Self-indulgent without sharing, self-important without shame, he is dead. The invincible shield of caring is a weapon from the sky against being dead. Come on. What does Lao Tzu? What does he say? If you look at the Chinese, this is how he finishes 67. No, I'll read the whole thing again. No, I'll take a break. The phrase that I ended with is hone, harvest, home. Hone. Hone like a cone that's been generated that goes to the very origin point. Home. What home? The home that is not only here, but is here everywhere. It's a home harvest. Now discard compassion and encouragement. Discard economy and generosity. Discard behind and summit. Death indeed. Now compassion thereby battling, then they penetrate. Thereby defending, then they are firm. Heaven prepared to help them. Thereby compassion protects them. And here's the translation of 67. And it's actually quite long. It's one of the longest in all of the Tao Te Ching. The three treasures. And you hear later on about the three treasures in religious Taoism, or the 8 treasures that have been developed out of this, and they're put into movements and packaged and sold for great sums everywhere, and it's a disgrace. It is a disgrace. Heaven, earth, all call me great resemble not semblance. Now, only great because resemble not semblance. If semblance, boring indeed, it's mediocrity. Now I have 3 treasures. Remember and treasure their selves. The one is recognized as compassion. Another one is recognized as economy. Another one is recognized as not daring busy heaven-earth's summit. Compassion, therefore, can encourage. Economy, therefore, can be generous. Not dares busy heaven-earth's summit, therefore, can hone home harvest. Now discard compassion and encouragement. Discard economy and generosity. Discard behind and summit. Death indeed. Now compassion, thereby battling, then they penetrate. Thereby defending, then they are firm. Heaven prepared to help them. Thereby compassion protects them. We're going to take a break, but one little emendation here towards the end. With compassion, if you are fighting, there's penetration through the conflict. If you are defending, then there's firmness, and nothing comes through. So the whole sense here, which is bastardized in martial arts, absolutely bastardized in martial arts, the whole gist of what the gestalt that Lao Tzu is saying is that if you go either way, fighting or defending, the exact penetration firmness occurs together. So that in the sphericality of the Tao, one learns, like Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, don't get caught up in the illusion of fighting, or likewise the illusion of defending. They all happen in a common, all under heavenness, without any boundaries or barriers. And when one does it all, the all, like a tailwind, picks one out of the absurdity into the real. It's so the chapters in the Tao Te Ching are like that. They're quite independent, yet they resonate together. There are no strings, there are no lines connecting them, but they resonate together. And the key to the pattern of resonation is that every other one initially goes together. So that this grandfather phasing, this grandmother phasing, so that chapter 66 and chapter 68 have a kind of a resonance. What kind do they have? They have a little tiny resonance, like when you were a little student in grade school and you had music lessons and the teacher blew a pitch pipe. And your kid saying, it's like tuning sound. So if you take any odd or any even paired chapters, you can begin to get yourself into tune. Now don't mistake the tuning for Zubin Mehta, because the whole symphony requires a lot of learning. You have to really be a conductor on a grand scale to make the Tao Te Ching sing. But when that chorus sings together, and the whole starry cosmos says, Spirit, Spirit. Whatever he wants to do. Chapter 68, Resonant Heaven. Notice right away, there it is, Resonant Heaven. The Chinese term, Pei Tian. And D.T. Suzuki translates it, comply with heaven. And that's not quite it. Who am I to say? Well, he was only 21 when he did this, and I'm 51. It's just, this works. This works in English. He was Japanese. He just learned English. I'm just learning English too, but on a deeper level. Chapter 68, Resonant Heaven. An excellent warrior is one not warlike. An excellent fighter is one not wrathful. Completed conquering enemies, one not quarrels. Completely employing the people, one busies the basics. This is called not quarrel, it sells te. Now remember, this whole series of chapters, this whole ordinal matrix of chapters is all about te. We haven't even got to Tao yet. It's all about te. So it's like not so much lurking in the background, but constantly looming in a super attention is this theme coming up in this symphony, this theme of te. This is called not quarrel, itself's te. Now, why would he say that? Because he had a line in here. He had Chinese characters that I translate completed conquering enemies, one not quarrels. So he's saying there's a tone of not quarreling, which is a very special tone. It's not because there's no one to quarrel with. It's not because you don't feel like quarreling. It's because you have won all of the quarrels that will ever be victoriously, and in that particular state, that's what he wants to express in Listen for Me. The state that there are no more quarrels ever necessary again. Can you imagine? Mm-hmm. Can you remember being in such a feeling tone state where there were no more quarrels ever? Mm-hmm. He's saying that state, this is called not quarrel, itself's te. And then he follows it with a second line. This is called employing the men's self's ability. Why does he follow up, this is called not quarrel, itself's te, with this is called employing the men's selves ability? Because the line before, he had this whole statement here about an excellent fighter is one not wrathful. But he's modifying that by another statement, a line that comes after completed conquering enemies, one not quarrels. The line before that is, an excellent fighter is one not wrathful. The line after it is, completely employing the people, one busies the basics. And those two together come into this line. This is called employing the men's self's ability. And then, like Lao Tzu, characteristically, a third line comes in. This is called Resonant Heaven, which is the title of the chapter. And what does that line jibe with? It jibes with the beginning. An excellent warrior is one not warlike. And then he ends this whole chapter, he ends it with a little dab of Chinese characters, like one dotting all the I's and crossing the T's. And he says, sense ever perfection. Or D.T. Suzuki's translation is, since olden times, this is the way human beings perfect things. We don't need to go to these translations. Better if we don't, with your permission. Notice that the whole structure of chapter 68 is built on this kind of correspondence. The first line is with the last line. The second line is with the second from last line. And then the third line is with the third from last line. And right in the center, that line corresponds with the second line and also with the sixth line. So that the second, the fourth, and the sixth lines go together. It's like if you had a guitar string, a special kind of stringed instrument, like a guitar. You had 7 strings, and you pluck the second, fourth, and sixth together. You would get a certain sound, because all of them come together. If you did the first and the 7th together, you would get a sound. If you did the 3rd and the 5th together, you would get a sound. And Lao Tzu is saying, why is he doing these 3 sounds? Because the chapter before is like the 3 treasures. Possible. But because the grandfather things in chapter 66 is behind you, which has been encouraging us to keep track of what is behind us at the same time as what is before us. And when we've got those two together, we get the middle, us, much clearer. And so he's giving us 3 examples One before and behind, another before and behind, another before, behind, and us together. So chapter 68 is like a magisterial handling of language structure. You have to be really awake. You've got to rub the preconceived notions out of your eyes, because Lao Tzu is not waiting around for you. He just is out there, and you have to go out there with him. The great Chinese Zen master Huang Po said, sometimes birds fly upside down. And if you want to see them, you've got to really do some contortion. Chapter 69, notice that 69 now is going to have an immediate pitch pipe tuning fork resonance for 67. What was 67? 3 treasures. What's 69? The mysterious function. What is that mysterious function? The way in which correspondences not only happen, correspondences happen. It's more sure than causality. But not only do correspondences happen, we can be included in any correspondence that happens. We have such a nature that we can be a third resonance in any correspondence between any two. Anything that has any correspondence in this cosmos can include us as a mystical third. So we can be a part of the little chamber music going on in a room. We can be part of an oratorio that includes the whole cosmos. Or we can sit this one out. It'll go on without us. You can sit back and let the butterflies go. So Lao Tzu is giving us here in 69 the mysterious function. Now we've got to do this. We've got to come to some other translation. We have to have guys to spill. How else will we know that we're important? 69. And this is how I first heard the Tao Te Ching about 35 years ago. And just like you, wondered, what did I read? The strategists have a say. If I cannot be host, then let me be guest. But if I dare not advance even an inch, then let me retire a foot. This is what they call a campaign without a march. Sleeves up but no bare arms, shooting but no enemies, or arming without weapons. Than helpless enemies nothing is worse. To them I lose my treasures. When opposing enemies meet, the compassionate man is the winner. Woo. It's not a language that says directly what it says. It's not a language that is expressing, that someone is using to express their meaning. The favorite title of a book of mine about 20 years ago was by Stanley Clavell, Must We Mean What We Say? Published by Cambridge University Press. Yes, we must mean what we say. Otherwise, why talk to us? You have to get a New Jersey accent to really get that through. The mysterious function. Lao Tzu, speaking English, says, employed in war, this say, I not dare act the host, but act the guest. Not dare advance 1 inch, but withdraw 1 foot. That's the saying. But he goes on expressing. He's saying that there's a saying. There it is. And then further, this is called marching the not march. Yeah, you're marching. But like Thoreau said, to a different drummer. Which drummer? The one that's not playing any sound, but is keeping the rhythm. How do you move to a drummer that's not playing any sound? Well, you can move that way sometimes, and you can slide it right out of time-space. Or right back in if you need to. Chuang-Tzu says, doing this, am I a man who dreamed that I was a butterfly? Or was I the butterfly dreaming that I'm a man? Or Lewis Carroll says, do not wake up. The light came because we are just figments of this dream. And if you wake in, bye-bye. This is called marching the not march, threatening not weapons. What do you do with weapons? Many of you haven't seen weapons, but weapons are made to not only shoot, but to threaten. The spear was always a great weapon because you never had to really throw it. You could just... You only used it when they came after you. Only a fool would throw a spear. Javelins, yes, you throw, but in track meets. So it's like threatening. Threatening with not weapons. This kind of gloominess to get the attention, no weapons. No weapons at all. That means not using anything as a weapon. You're not using your eyebrows as a weapon. You're not using your hands as a weapon. You're not using your persona as a weapon. You're not using your psyche as a weapon. Well then, how do you threaten with absolutely no weapons? You do it with not weapons. Well, that's a very peculiar kind of threatening, isn't it? Yeah, it is. It's like a thunderstorm of joy. It has a very peculiar tone of personality. This is called marching the not march, threatening not weapons, charging not hostile, engaging not war. You're doing, but you're not putting a spin on what you're doing that carries hostility, threats, war, marching. Notice those four are all images of humanity condensed into military units made to follow orders. He's saying, don't make this square. Marching, weapons, hostility, war. And then he brings in a language which is very specific. The Chinese translates almost evenly as if one were just going to write this 1,000 times on the blackboard, or write it once and for all on some stones that one would put at the base of the public deliberation. Of evils, none greater than dismissing an enemy. Dismissing an enemy will lose our treasures. Which enemy? The reduction of our humanity and spirit to marching, to hostility, to weapon threatening, to war. That's our enemy. That is our enemy. Don't dismiss such a formidable enemy. It's absolutely foolish to mistake that that is the enemy. That is our common enemy. We can have a fantastic community just by realizing that that is our common enemy. And one should never just dismiss an enemy. Oh, we can't do anything about it. Oh, well, it's not really important. Oh, we're not quite sure. We don't agree that that's the enemy. Lao Tzu says the greatest of all evils is to dismiss an enemy. Dismissing an enemy will lose our treasures. Therefore, in matched forces, mutual engagements, the giving one conquers indeed. In matched forces, mutual encounters, the giving one conquers indeed. One of the applications of this is Aikido. There's nothing you can do to somebody who can move out of the way faster than you can throw punches. I mean, you end up looking absolutely ridiculous. If you can move out of the way faster than someone can throw punches, they can never touch you. Never. And there's a psychological tone of wholeness where you move so fast that you're like patting them on the back as their fist is coming through pure space. Geez, that was great. Where'd you learn to punch like that? Yes. Let's go and have a meal. Talk about this. Because there's no way that you can be hurt. How can you be hurt? The mysterious function. What does it go with? It goes with 3 treasures. What does it go with? It goes with simplicity te, the last one from last week. Let's try something. Let's take the last one from last week and the last one from this week and put them together. Notice that we're not just going every other chapter, but now we're going to go in sets of 4. We're going to go to the last one of the previous 4 and the last one of this 4. Notice that, like a good Baroque fugue, you can develop an interesting pattern of resonant structure in Lanzi. He invites, he allows, he encourages us to play in this way, in his language. Simplicity te and the mysterious function. In ancient times, well done down, one did not thereby enlighten the people. It will thereby be plain to them. They're difficult governing because the itself's people clever. Too much cleverness governing a country, it's that country's curse. Not with cleverness to govern a country, it's that country's blessing. Who knows these, both of them? Also a patterned mode. Always know the patterned mode. This is called profound te. Profound te. Deep indeed. Resonant indeed. Commonness reversed indeed. Thus obtaining a great follow-up. Employed in war this saying, I not dare act the host, but act the guest. Not dare advance 1 inch, but withdraw 1 foot. This is called marching the not march. Threatening not weapons. Charging not hostile. Engaging not war. Of evils none greater than dismissing an enemy. Dismissing an enemy will lose our treasures. Therefore, in matched forces, mutual engagements, the giving one conquers indeed. Well, that's as far as I got.